And I am done. All right, so I just finished up reading Fae and Fair. This is the second book in the Wandering Inn series written by Pirateaba, and I wanted to give you my unedited thoughts upon finishing the book, which was just now. So before I get into my review, I need to give you a little bit of a backdrop about what the Wandering Inn is, because it's a little bit confusing, and I think a lot of the people that are watching this probably haven't read this yet, so they don't really understand. But it took me a little while to understand what's going on, and I want to fill you in before we get into the actual review. So this is a web serial that has been converted into books, and it is the longest fantasy series of all time by word count. And to give you a little perspective about what that means, this series is a little over 10 million words right now. And The Wheel of Time, which everybody considers an extremely long series, because it is, which is 15 quite large books, is a little under 5 million words. And this is 10 million words, and growing at a pretty rapid pace. The author, Pirateaba, which is an unknown person, they want to keep their anonymity, which is I totally respect and understand, and think more authors probably should do that, puts out 2 chapters per week, and about 50,000 words per week. So this is growing at a crazy pace. I mean, it's really exciting. So the series and the web serial is split up into volumes. And think of the volumes as like a beginning, middle, and end to a larger story. But they don't really stop writing a volume and take a break. They just kind of keep on going. So there's currently 8 completed volumes, and they're working on the 9th one. Now, the books don't correspond to volumes, because the books would have to be, like this big to be a volume. And the volumes are getting longer as the series goes on. So the first volume, which is the first book, was about 1,000 pages long, which is pretty big. The second volume is the second book, and that's the book that I just read, and it's about 1,700 pages. That's why it took me so long to get this review out, because the 1,700 pages is like 500 pages longer than the longest book I've ever read. And so it took a really long time. Now, moving on, the volumes are split up into multiple books. So I think the 3rd volume is split up into 2 books. The 4th volume is split up into 2 books. I think the 5th volume is split up into like 3 books, and it gets really big from there. And I'm pretty sure that the 8th volume is going to have to be something like 8 books total to encompass that entire volume. But there's been 7 books out so far, and the author is slowly releasing these books in ebook and audiobook form as the months go by. I think they started maybe last year, so they're pumping them out pretty quick. So with that backdrop, let me tell you my thoughts about this book. I loved this book. I thought it was so good. If you watched my review of Volume 1, I said very similar comments. But I feel like this one is even better than the first book. So the story I want to get into. And I don't want to ruin anything for you, because I really do encourage you to check out these books, and I don't want the story ruined for you. But because it's in a web serial format, you can't super tell when you're reading the book. But one of the huge benefits of this, because it sounds like a negative, right? But the positive is these chapters are quite long. It takes me I read pretty quickly, but it takes me like 45 minutes to get through a chapter. And there's like a beginning, middle, and end to every chapter. And that's really fun, because you can just sit down in one decent reading session and feel like you got like a self-contained story out of it, even though there's this much bigger story going on. So, there's a beginning, middle, and end to every chapter, and there's really a beginning, middle, and end to each of these books, which is really nice. I imagine that might change a little bit as I get further along in this, as the volumes are split up into multiple books, but so far it's been an extremely enjoyable experience. I like to think of this series as really in like a Dungeons and Dragons-esque book, because the essential story here is that you have this kind of Dungeons and Dragons world where literally characters are leveling up. They have classes. As they get experience in a certain class, they'll level that up. They'll get new skills. They'll get unique skills that are kind of randomized. And it's really fun. But you have a group of humans, and that's getting a more complex story. I don't want to say more than that. That have randomly been teleported from Earth in modern times over to this world, and they're super confused about A, why they got transported, B, what is this world all about, and C, as they're doing certain tasks, they're literally leveling up. And they're just as confused as you or I would be if this happened to us. And they're trying to deal with these circumstances and make the best of it. It's really fun to learn this world through their perspective and see this world unfold. And the story is getting grander and grander as we go along. You know, the first book had this story that took place over multiple cities. Now this book, it's starting to tell stories from the entire continent and going into multiple continents. And as I go online and I look at this world, the world looks like it's larger than Earth and has many, many continents, each with their own cultures, their own races of, humans and different sorts of beasts, like an ant type of character, or these smaller dragon type characters. And it's really fun to see this rich culture and the story really starting to expand. The world building in this book is probably the best part of this book. And, I've mentioned before that it's a little difficult for me to describe exactly what makes a good world building book good. And in my mind, a good world building is when you get truly lost in that world, where you can visualize everything. And you keep thinking about it for days and weeks and years after you've read the book. And that's clearly the case for me in this. Even though I just finished the book, I can tell that I'm going to be thinking about this and remembering intricate details about this world for an extremely long time. I liken it to, I view Malazan as not only my favorite series, but some of the best world building ever. And I can so intimately remember all the details of that world, all the details of every book. Whereas a world like Wheel of Time, another series that I love, but the world building I don't view as to the quality of Malazan, the books kind of run together. I couldn't really tell you the major differences between book 6 and 7. I could tell you the plot overall, but it would be hard for me to really break down the differences on an intimate level. This book is going to be more in the Malazan theme for me, where I'm always going to be able to remember what happened to book 2 and book 1 and so on. It's so vividly drawn out, and it's such a fun world that you just get lost. At least I did. I love that the world is slowly getting unfolded and it's getting this grander scale to it. It doesn't feel sudden. It doesn't feel rushed. And partly I think that's because the series is so long. It would be kind of crazy if it did rush things along, because where do you go once you get there? But I love the pace of this slow unfolding of this story. And quite frankly, by the end of this book, it started talking about all the different conflicts that have been unfolding throughout this book and really making it picture perfect about what's happening in this world. And it's crazy, the depth that's been going on, and I truly love it. The species in this book I thought have been extremely well done. I haven't played Dungeons & Dragons since I was a kid. I mean, you have the classic type of creatures that you would expect to see in one of those books, like the classic small little goblins. But you get this rich diversity of these characters where you get these crazy, like one of the characters is this many, many tons, blob of body parts that's been reanimated, like an undead glob that's just so disgusting and vivid and interesting. You've got dragons and skeletons and humanoid hyenas and enormous bees and these humanoid sort of dragons and rock crabs and zombies and drakes and super miniature people, not like dwarves, but super tiny, like fairies and golems, and the list goes on and on and on. I did not just describe all of them. I literally just scratched the surface. And I'm quite confident as the series goes along, that list is going to magnify, continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger and grander and grander and grander. And I think it's awesome. Now, the characters in this book, I think, is probably my biggest criticism with the book. I do like the characters a lot, but the series mostly focuses on two major point of views. On one hand, you have this character who's an innkeeper, and she is just too good in my mind. She's that classic, always wants to do the right thing, is just too kind of a person. And I love kind people in my life. That's who I want to surround myself with. but it's too bland. And then you have the second main character that is this runner. She delivers messages from one city to the next. And she's that classic kind of angsty teenager. I don't believe she's a teenager. I think she's a young adult. But she has that, everybody's out to get me and I'm kind of mad at the world. And, I liked her more in this book than the first one because I think she's actually undergoing some nice character growth. And I'm getting the sense that by the third or fourth or fifth books, that I'm truly going to fall in love with this character, but it's taking a little while to get there. Now, this is saved by the fact that there's a lot of side characters, and there are point of views of some of these side characters as well, and they are lovely. Virtually all of the characters in this book that are side characters are amazing. They add such amazing depth to this story. I think they're very compelling. I love that some of them are on the more good spectrum, some on the bad spectrum, a lot of gray in between. And I just truly adore them. And they save the character side of the story in a significant way for me. The writing style also can be a little off-putting to some. Now, I mentioned that there's the structure to it, which I really like, of these chapters being their own self-contained kind of stories. But the prose is a little weak. It's a little bit better from the first book to the second book, so there's been some growth here. And if the growth continues on a linear track, it's going to be amazing as we get several books in. But right now, it's a little lacking. When you compare the writing quality to some of the major titans of the fantasy genre, this book is in the bottom half. There's too many common descriptions for actions, there's only so much that you can read that a character was shrugging or staring. And there's lots of little things like that are just repetitive, and they lack a little creativity in the writing quality. Now, luckily for me, and I've mentioned it before, that I don't need that to enjoy a good story. I love Brandon Sanderson, and he's in this bottom half of quality prose as well. Guy Gavriel Kay, who's clearly in that top tier, I don't love his stories very much because I think his stories suffer while his writing quality is very high, and I just don't ultimately love those books. But if you're somebody who really craves a really rich and amazing writing style, you may suffer reading this book a little bit. Overall, loved this book. I highly encourage you to check it out. Don't be thrown off by the long page count. Just enjoy yourself. This doesn't have to be your only book you're reading. In fact, I would encourage you to read another book along and just read a chapter here and there. It's wonderful, and you'll get high enjoyment out of the fact that you're going to get these little stories all the time that really add together to make this wonderful whole. So I'm thoroughly enjoying my experience. I can't wait to read book 3. Go check it out. All of these stories are free on thewanderinginn.com. I think that's what it is. But just Google The Wandering Inn. You'll go straight to the website. Everything's free. Now, I happen to be paying for them because I really like to read on my Kindle, but they're really cheap. I think they're $3.99 per book. I paid $3.99 for a 1,700-page book. Your value doesn't get a lot better than that when you're buying a book. But if you like to read it if you're fine reading it on a computer, this is free. You can print out the pages yourself. And please check it out. Hope you'd enjoy this, and happy reading to you.